I recently realized that in my nearly 10 years of making videos on this platform, I have never given my official ranking of the Star Wars films.
What?
And perhaps there's a reason for that, because watching this video, you're definitely going to see there are some hot takes in here. My opinions about the ranking will certainly be controversial for some, as anyone's opinion on Star Wars is.
So uncivilized.
But just so we're all clear, this is just my opinion, and honestly my ranking changes every now and then. But please share with me your ranking of the Star Wars films in the comments below. At the time of making this, there are 11 major Star Wars films, including the prequels, the original trilogy, the sequels, Rogue One, and Solo: A Star Wars Story. And this video is likely going to go from being a bit negative and critical with my least favorite to my most favorite and positive at the end. So please roast me for my Star Wars rankings in the comments. Hey everyone, it's Andrew. First up, we gotta get out of the way. My least favorite Star Wars movie ever made is Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
I've only seen this movie once at the time of recording this, and once was certainly enough for me, anyway. Funnily enough, the only time I saw this was at a premiere screening, a midnight screening at a beautiful theater in Sydney. In a packed theater, there wasn't a single seat left, and there were moments when watching this in a packed theater really made the emotions I had about it heightened and feel much more visceral than they perhaps would have been had I been watching this alone. For example, the collective groan the cinema made when Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo at that point, kissed Rey. Everyone facepalmed, I think, and cringed, and it was a painful moment, one that we certainly weren't expecting. But that wasn't the reason I have a problem with this film. It was more just the fact it felt afraid to take risks. Everything Disney had potentially set up with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi was kind of just resolved in a peaceful, kind of boring way in this one for me. For example, they teased the idea of Chewbacca's death, and I was like, oh my gosh, great, they're actually taking a risk. They're actually doing something that is quite profound, killing off a major character. Wait, Chewie's still alive. He fooled you. You thought he was dead for a second, didn't you? No, he was on the other ship. You see that other one in the background that no one noticed? He was on that one, just so we're clear. Because of course you can't kill Chewbacca, because we have to sell Chewbacca toys in the future, and it wouldn't be the same if he was dead.
Money!
Also, the point where they were about to wipe C-3PO's memory, and then they're like, oh no, wait, he remembers everything, it's all good. Again, another tease of something that was to happen, and then didn't. I also have a bit of a problem with the ending of this movie, and sitting in the cinema was really hoping they'd take the darker route with the ending. Let me explain what I mean. First of all, yes, somehow Palpatine returned is completely absurd. I mean, at the time, I didn't mind the idea of him coming back so much, but let's be real, he really seemed pretty dead in Return of the Jedi, and then they didn't really ever properly explain how he was resurrected. In fact, it was explained more clearly in Fortnite, which is so strange. There was a Fortnite event around this time, and I believe it had a monologue from Palpatine explaining how he was resurrected, basically, and still remained alive, and that was the explanation we got.
The day of revenge. The day of the Sith.
In the film, all we got was
Somehow Palpatine returned.
and then also I believe something in the opening titles mentioning it. Just feels like weak writing, guys. Just feels a little weak. But then with the ending of this, I really was hoping that they would keep Kylo Ren or Ben Solo alive, that he'd have to live with what he'd done, the consequences of his actions of turning to the dark side, of being filled with anger and rage and jealousy. I was hoping that Rey was indeed going to be the one who died. And I don't really have a problem with them introducing new or newish force powers to Star Wars, like the ability to regenerate, the ability to use the Force to give your life energy to someone. And I did honestly kind of like the dyad thing that was going on between Rey and Kylo, the way they were connected in the Force, which I guess you could argue is similar to how Luke and Darth Vader were connected in the original trilogy. But just imagine what this would have been like had they kept Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, alive at the end. If he'd had to live with the consequences of his actions, if he'd had to live with seeing Rey die before him because of his actions, and not feeling like he had the ability to save her. I think it would have been much darker and much more profound, but let's be real, Disney can't kill a Disney princess. To me, the best part of The Rise of Skywalker is Adam Driver's performance. Every scene he's in is captivating and engaging. He brings so much life and character in the subtleties of his movements and motions and mannerisms to Kylo Ren and Ben Solo, and for me, he was the standout of this film. Possibly the only reason I'd ever watch it again. Let's be real, I'm probably not going to watch it again.
Do we believe this?
Oh, hold on guys, I'm getting a phone call. Hello? What? You want me to try play Lego Star Wars on my phone? Huh? This is me playing LEGO Star Wars The Force Awakens on the new Red Magic 9S Pro, a smartphone that's designed and built specifically for gaming. Now, it may just look like any other smartphone, but if you flick this switch, suddenly you're in gaming mode. Here you can add games to your library or easily pair the phone with a keyboard and mouse or a controller. Or use these plugins to do things like add a crosshair to the screen, change the aspect ratio, and even control the upgraded cooling system featuring frost cooling gel. You can also control the phone's performance, GPU settings, modify things like touch sensitivity, and customize the phone to your liking. You can also leave your games open and switch straight back to it being a normal phone. I also tried it with Star Wars Hunters, and the Red Magic handled it like a beast. Super fast load times, feels like it's built for it, which it is. I also really like that the back of the phone is fully flat with no camera bumps. It's smooth and sleek and comfy to hold. Hello? Yeah, there's the link's in the description. That's what we said we're doing it. It's in the description. There's a link to it in the description. If you want to use the phone, if you want to check it out for yourself, click the link in the description. Yeah, I told them, okay? Thanks to the Red Magic 9S Pro for sponsoring this video and making my LEGO Star Wars gaming dreams come true. Goodbye. I told you this list was going to get controversial. It begins now. My second least favorite Star Wars film ever made is Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Oh boy.
Millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror.
So The Force Awakens is actually the highest grossing Star Wars film ever. The reboot of Star Wars in the 2010s, releasing in 2015. And even though, yes, arguably, you could say the film is fun, yes, it introduces new characters, yes, some of them are interesting, like Finn. For me, this film was way too much of a reboot, and it felt like that. It felt like it was rehashing ideas from the original trilogy and presenting them, I guess, in a modern setting, but not to my liking. Now, I understand The Force Awakens is responsible for rebooting Star Wars for an entirely new era of Star Wars fans. It's for the new generation, and perhaps I'm just one of those 90s kids who's like, oh, it's not real Star Wars. Not really. But for me, also, there was nothing that memorable about this film. The best part about it, to me, is easily Finn. The fact a stormtrooper is defecting from the Empire or from the First Order, seeing that it's evil, which kind of doesn't make sense, seeing as though he's been conditioned from birth to follow the Empire and wouldn't really have, I guess, the intelligence to break out of that, perhaps. Let's be real, Finn has too much personality for a stormtrooper.
Did you see that?
But if you can overlook that, he's the most interesting thing about this film, which is kind of disappointing why his character was shelved a little bit and moved aside for the following two films. However, in a lot of ways, it just, to me, felt like a reboot of A New Hope, and maybe that's naive of me, but basically, oh, they destroyed Death Star 1 and 2, let's build a bigger one, and it's the size of a planet this time. Oh, the Empire are back again. Oh, there's a Sith/Darkseid character, and they're not as interesting as what we've seen before, and that's the big thing for me. Snoke as a villain was just like, yeah, I don't know. He just doesn't seem that kind of engaging to me. Maz Kanata is the strangest character because I still feel like we haven't properly had an explanation of who she is and how she knows so much. But why is that the case, Maz? Why is that the case?
Good question. For another time.
Yes, it is a good question. The time is now. I'm still waiting, and I'm not talking about other expanded Star Wars media, books, novels, comics, and stuff. I want an explanation in something like this, and they never got to it. And I think maybe that was my problem with this film. It felt like they'd worked out all of these plot points without thinking of what was to come of them. They just created a bunch of Star Wars and characters and narrative elements, and they're like, oh, we'll figure out what happens later on. We don't have an overarching story, which was later revealed by Daisy Ridley. She did confirm that they were kind of making things up as they went along. And I felt like I got a whiff of that right from the get-go with this film.
Thought it was a bunch of mumbo-jumbo.
Coming in 9th place, I'm putting The Last Jedi. Yes, I rate The Last Jedi over The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker. I do right now, anyway. Because I felt like of the three films, even though it is kind of a mess and the middle section is super weird and everything that happens at the casino planet Cantonica and the fact they shelved Finn and didn't really follow anything from the first film and just decided to make up it as they're going, and the big noses and lack of Star Wars knowledge and... But of the three films, for me, it was the one that was willing to take more risks. The one that was willing to be different, to set itself apart. And even though it made a mess of that at times, I think it was still interesting, I want to say. Of the three, it's probably the one I'd watch again, be more willing to watch again. Anyway, we're talking about this specific film. I guess it's relevant to talk about it versus the other two, seeing as though I've ranked it higher than the other two. And I'm still not sure how I feel about the whole, oh, Luke died because he used too much Force and used the Force too hard. And yes, it was weird, I guess, Princess Leia flying through space. I guess it has a lot of weird things. But here are the things I liked about it. To me, it has the most memorable set pieces and is much more visually striking than the two other films. For example, the planet Crate, I think, is one of the standout sequel film planets, and it's very strong visual imagery, which I guess is closer to the original trilogy and the prequels. George Lucas worked with Ralph McQuarrie early on to establish the visuals of Star Wars, to establish what this galaxy would look like. And for me, The Last Jedi has that certain sense of familiarity while still being original. Crate is the perfect example of that. The striking, imposing row of AT-AT standing before the Crate base, the red salt, the fact it's a salt planet, it looks visually striking and different to anywhere we've seen. Even the island of Arc 2, it feels like a mystical Star Wars location more than I think anything we see in the other two films. What are you kidding me? Exegol? Oh yeah, dark, scary planet where you can't even see anything because it's too dark because, you know, production budget and stuff, and there's lightning and all the Star Destroyers are here, and no. Also, just going back to The Rise of Skywalker, where did he get that army of Sith troopers? What, they were just all there? How does that make any sense? It doesn't. How is he just accumulating an entire army the size of the Empire on this planet in the shadows? Where do they all come from? Don't tell me he used the Force. That's not how the Force works.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I enjoyed seeing the insubordination and power struggle within the Resistance. The fact they're literally fighting amongst their ranks. Poe Dameron trying to get power. The way the purple hair lady sacrificed herself, jumping to light speed and cutting the First Order Star Destroyer in half. Pretty cool. Something we haven't really seen before in Star Wars. It's unique. The fact they killed Snoke. This moment really got me because it was not what I was expecting. I don't think anyone was really expecting it. It kind of came out of nowhere. The fact they built him up in the first film as this major big villain, he's going to lead this trilogy. The fact he was interrogating Rey, holding her hostage, and then straight up gets cut in half by Kylo Ren. Really not what I was expecting. It got me. And I know people criticize the stunt choreography in this fight scene afterwards. I enjoy it. It's fun to watch. Also, another striking Star Wars location. Something about the giant red curtains. I remember it. It's visually striking. And to me, that's what sets this film apart from the others. Yes, like I mentioned, I'm not sure about the whole Luke thing. Even Yoda coming back was a bit weird. I did like the way he was maniacally laughing and then burning. We all learned Yoda's really just a pyromaniac. Yes, the whole General Organa Leia thing was kind of weird. Yes, the whole Cantonica Canto Bite sequence was weird. But if you look past that stuff and you watch the 20 minutes of the film that's actually good, it's some fun Star Wars.
The need in front of your nose.
Now, coming in 8th place is Solo, a Star Wars story. I think this film has aged quite well and is a much better watch now than it was when it initially released. First of all, with this one, I didn't really like the idea of even exploring Solo's origin story because he's Han Solo. You don't really need to know where he came from, and it seems like a strange choice. Also, no one can play Harrison Ford, if we're being real. Even though Alden Ehrenreich did a great job, and I hope I got his pronunciation of his name right, because it, you know, how do you even, what? It just, to me, still didn't feel like the same character in a lot of ways, which I think is my main criticism of this film. Yes, I like the story of it, but if you kind of look past the fact that it's not Harrison Ford, there is a lot to like here. Woody Harrelson's performance also really enjoyed his character, and really enjoyed seeing the character arc of Han Solo and how he basically shoots first. He shoots his mentor at the end of this. His character arc being complete and evolving into the scoundrel that he ended up being, the smuggler. I guess one of the criticisms of this film was that it tried to explain too much. For example, where Han Solo got his blaster, how he met Chewbacca, how he got his name, how he got the Millennium Falcon, how he knows Lando Calrissian, how he is the way he is, why he shot first. So many things in one film, and in seemingly the space of only, a few weeks or a few months that the film takes place in. It just seemed a bit unrealistic in that sense. That said, though, it's a fun watch. Visually, this film also bothered me a bit. It's just very dark. The color grade on it is quite dark. The shots are dark. There's a lot of dark locations. And yes, I guess in some ways that feels kind of Star Wars-y, but this one also went through a bunch of changes in the production stages. There was a change of director. Ron Howard came on, eventually finishing this thing off. Initially, it was supposed to have more of a comedic tone, but that ended up shifting into, I guess, a more traditional filmmaking, fun action adventure with a bit of comedy thrown in there, a bit of drama kind of film. I rewatched Solo last year, I believe, and it stayed with me. It's nothing groundbreaking or mind-blowing, but it's a fun watch. Also, I like the introduction of Lady Kira and Crimson Dawn and everything surrounding that organization. Something I'm still hoping we see explored more of. I guess we're getting it in Star Wars Outlaws. And to me, it is kind of disappointing we didn't get a continuation of the events of Solo. We didn't really see what happened next. There was supposed to be another film followed up or even a potential series, I believe, and none of that got developed because Solo completely underperformed at the box office. Like I said, it's not an amazing film. It's nothing hugely memorable, but I think people were much more critical of it than it initially deserved. Also, kind of funny, they just had to throw Darth Maul in there and he just turns his lightsaber on to be like, yes, I am Darth Maul. Here is my lightsaber. Okay, in number 7, this next ranking has really torn me because I feel like everything from here up I feel really strongly about and very fond of, and it's hard to kind of place, let's just do it. In 7th place is Rogue One.
Really?
I'm gonna go ahead and say that Rogue One is easily my favorite Disney Star Wars film, and potentially favorite Disney Star Wars project that they've made. Of all Star Wars films, I think I've seen this one the most, and it stayed with me the most, and a big part of that is honestly because of the ending, because everyone dies, and that was a risk that Disney were willing to take. It was a move they were willing to take, to say, yes, Star Wars is dark. This period in Star Wars is probably the darkest of all, and everyone's gonna die, and you're gonna witness them dying. It was tragic. I nearly cried at the end, I think. Maybe I did cry. Maybe I'm still crying. Maybe I cry every time. And I feel like this is gonna have whole new meaning once we see Andor Season 2, and seeing Andor in Rogue One after this is gonna just crush me with the way he tragically dies and has sacrificed everything for the rebellion and for the greater cause. But Rogue One is not only visually striking, has memorable characters, and I believe also went through a bit of a rewrite. For example, there are elements of this, such as the fact Jyn is wearing the kyber crystal around her neck, and that's never really explored. They never really talk about or reference why she has that. I also feel like Chirrut Imwe was likely at some point supposed to have a lightsaber and be a Jedi, and that was just never properly explored. Maybe. These are all speculative things. This also has my favorite Disney Star Wars villain in director Orson Krennic, played by Ben Mendelsohn. He's an Australian actor, the guy's a legend, and there's something so creepy and sinister about him. He's so driven by his own greed and his own plight for power. He's egotistical and a real standout to me. Also, Rogue One's kind of funny. K2SO is such an interesting sidekick kind of character. The fact he's an Imperial droid and the fact he's sassy, and then when he dies, it was so sad, man. I also enjoyed seeing Jyn Erso's origins, seeing how she was looked after, I guess, by her parents. Galen Erso as a character, being the engineer behind the Death Star, also such an interesting thing to explore. Saul Guerrero as well, just want to throw his name in there, super memorable character. But not only all that, probably one of my favorite scenes in all of Disney Star Wars is this one between Orson Krennic and Darth Vader. Just the way Darth Vader so dramatically walks out of his palace, steam everywhere for no reason at all. Maybe he just had a bubble bath in there. Also, the first time watching this, I really wasn't expecting him to choke Krennic. Vader here is really asserting his dominance and his power. Rogue One is dark, gritty. I enjoyed the space battles as well. Some interesting cinematography going on there we hadn't really seen in Star Wars before. I think it was the first time they were attaching the camera to the outside of the ships. We got that kind of POV. And every time I watch this film, I find new things to appreciate about it. Really like it. And I feel bad for putting it in 7th place, but I feel like nostalgia triumphs and you can't beat some of the original Star Wars, which is why, for me, in 6th place, I am putting Attack of the Clones, Episode 2, Anakin's teenage years filled with angst.
I don't like sand.
Ah, yes, Attack of the Clones. Certainly a flawed film, but I think I have to put it this high on the list because, like I said, I'm a 90s boy. I grew up with these films. This was my childhood. And seeing this in the cinema, I adored these films. I honestly don't even know where to start with talking about these films and the prequels and the original trilogy because they have such a place of nostalgia for me. I will be honest, watching these films as a kid, I had it on DVD and I would 100% skip over all the love scenes. I would literally just skip to the action parts. So basically, everything that happened with Anakin on Naboo with Padme, I think I've only seen a handful of times because as a kid, I used to just skip through these scenes because like I wanted to get to Obi-Wan and the action and the Jedi and everything that was happening there. Speedrunning Star Wars. Things this film did, man. It spawned countless memes. There's so many memes.
You wanna buy some death sticks?
The thing is, I don't understand how these films are so rich with memes. Like, in the writing, what was George Lucas doing? What was he thinking at the time to create so many memorable lines? There's something so iconic about all of it, and it's mind-blowing. There's no other film that probably is more memeable than Attack of the Clones.
I'm just a simple man trying to make my way in the universe.
Everything they say is iconic. iconic.
And not just the men, but the women and the children too.
Like literally every line in the film.
Then we decided to come and rescue you. Good job.
You just like, yeah, it feels like Attack of the Clones. Also, George Lucas has always been on the cutting edge of special effects, and that was also the same case with Attack of the Clones. This film looked incredible for 2002. Special effects, use of CGI, the use of blue screen, all the Jedi fighting in the arena, the amount of clones in the film, all of who were CGI at this point. The fact we were introduced to the clone army, the idea of the Clone Wars, exploring these ideas that were, I guess, touched on and referenced in the original trilogy. Yes, the pacing of this film is kind of weird. Yes, all of the dialogue is kind of interesting, to say the least.
I can't breathe.
But there's just something so iconic about it. It's George Lucas's Star Wars, and I do like the fact it explores Anakin's darker side, I guess, dealing with the idea that he's been separated from his mother for so many years, that he misses her, that she, has been tortured by the Tusken Raiders, basically. They killed her, and then him unleashing his anger and rage, and I guess you're seeing the early signs of him turning towards the dark side here. It's not only his brooding teenage angst and the fact he's not supposed to fall in love. The scene with Padme wearing this dress as well, and the fire. Like, what is going on here, George? For me, also, the prequels have so much personality in the planets. For example, Geonosis, even going back to Tatooine, seeing different parts of Tatooine. We get Camino. What a stunning, iconic location. And exploring more of the streets and city of Coruscant. You don't want to sell me death sticks. Why is this in Star Wars? Dex's Diner. George Lucas just wanted to put a 50s themed diner in Star Wars, and that's why Dex's Diner is here. And somehow Obi-Wan is friends with Dex. Goodness knows how. None of it really makes sense, but it's hilarious and funny and so much fun to watch. I want to sell you death sticks. That's an Australian actor. He was in The Matrix. Did you know that? And I'll give you 5 seconds to name the character's name in the comments below. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's Elan Sleaze-Begano. What a legend. Imagine naming a character Elan Sleaze-Begano. I love you, George Lucas. All right, we're getting down to the pointy end here. Coming in at number 5, my 5th favorite Star Wars film ever made is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I saw this in the cinemas 3 times, I believe, when I was a kid when it first released, and I just want to go on the record and say I loved Jar Jar Binks. He was funny, man. The way he moved, the way he talked, the way his tongue worked. I have nothing but fond memories for Jar Jar. I had so many Phantom Menace toys, I think, as well. It was just the perfect time. I was the perfect age for this. I had Lego. Everything came together around the time of the Phantom Menace. And I think this is where my initial love of Star Wars really started to heat up, I want to say. I'd seen the entire original trilogy and was obsessed with them before seeing this, but the Phantom Menace was like, oh my gosh, they're making new Star Wars? And I was still a kid, and even that was mind-blowing to me back then. That said, at the time, as I've spoken about in many recent videos, the Phantom Menace was highly criticized and highly hated by OG fans. People thought George Lucas was tarnishing the legacy he'd left with the original trilogy, that Star Wars was changing, the pacing, the characters, everything was so different, the feel of the Phantom Menace, and it definitely was not appreciated in the way it is today. For some, the Phantom Menace is their favorite Star Wars film, which is crazy. And I think a lot of that also comes down to some of the iconic imagery, namely the dual-bladed lightsaber and Duel of Fates with Darth Maul. And that's something I haven't mentioned up until now in this video, music. The music of Star Wars created by John Williams in every film, I think, is iconic. And yes, obviously, the original trilogy is always going to be the most iconic Star Wars music, but man, the Phantom Menace comes in a close second. Duel of Fates is unlike anything you'd heard before. There was something so ridiculously powerful about hearing that choir, seeing Qui-Gon, Darth Maul, and Obi-Wan go all out, and I think this was the first indication that, okay, lightsaber duels can be a bit more than what we saw in the original trilogy. Yes, obviously there was still a lot of fight choreography going on in the original trilogy, but let's be real, Luke was kind of untrained in using a lightsaber properly anyway, not at the level of prequel duelists, and Darth Vader is Darth Vader. He's in a suit, he can't really move too quickly, so there was only, I guess, a limited amount of dueling capabilities there were going to be, whereas with this, it's full gymnastics, stunt choreography, going crazy, doing flips, and the speed, man. I remember Ewan McGregor saying something in a recent interview that when he was filming the Phantom Menace duel with Darth Maul, that the cameraman had to turn the frame rate down on the cameras because they were simply moving too fast when dueling. That's kind of impressive. Once again, locations in this, the hidden city of Otogunga, Naboo, what a beautiful planet. Tatooine, I love the pod race. Oh my gosh, the pod racing sequence is stunning. Not only in its appearance and its conception, but in its sound design. Ben Burtt and George Lucas went crazy on this, using a lot of old car sounds, different engines, different combinations of things to create the iconic sounds of the pod races. And man, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, the video game, is still, to me, one of the best Star Wars games ever made because it really captures what I think this felt like to race at these speeds. I honestly really enjoyed Jake Lloyd's performance from his young age as Anakin as well. The death of Qui-Gon, super sad. Justice for Qui-Gon with stab wounds actually working in the pre-Disney era. And even just seeing the more political side of Star Wars in this. Seeing Palpatine in his early days. And just think of how different Star Wars would have been had Jar Jar, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon actually been eaten by one of these giant fish.
That smells stinkerwith.
Coming in 4th place is Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Now, I'm honestly having such a hard time figuring out what to say about the original trilogy because it's the original trilogy. How do you, in some ways, put one over the other? They're kind of together as a whole. I guess in a way, you could say that The Return of the Jedi is the least groundbreaking of the 3 films. It's still so ridiculously iconic. And I feel like the biggest takeaway from this film is both Luke and Vader's character arcs. In fact, Luke is tempted by the dark side, but refuses to join Palpatine and his father, refuses to turn. He's seen what the dark side looks like, and even though he's tempted, he never truly turns and stays true to who he is. Some people at the time were also kind of critical of the Ewoks, saying, what is this? What are these fuzzy little teddy bears they're putting in Star Wars now? It's kind of strange. To me, they've always been iconic. And let's be real, they are the murderous teddy bears of the dark forest of Endor, who will hunt you after dark. Look at all the stormtroopers they've killed. These guys are murderers, and yet they're so cute and fuzzy. Also, the reveal that Leia is Luke's sister is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, especially considering what happened in Empire Strikes Back. I guess at the time, neither of them knew, and I'm not sure George Lucas knew either. It'd be weird if he kind of did. But locations here are also super iconic. The dune seas of Tatooine with Jabba's sail barge, Jabba's palace. Boba Fett falling in the Sarlacc pit is kind of ridiculous, let's all be real. Kind of comical in some ways, especially the way he screams. Really cool seeing the Rebel fleet. Oh my gosh, the space battle. Stunning. Admiral Akbar, are you kidding me?
It's a trap!
I think people just forget how iconic and how many moments come out of these films. When you go back and think about it and watch them, you're like, there's so many elements that come together that are just in part of normal everyday culture nowadays. And they all came from here. Back then in the 80s and the 70s, it was all new and fresh. And it's still here 40 years later. The second Death Star and, of course, the Emperor. Remember, up until this point in Star Wars, we hadn't really seen too much of Palpatine. It was really only on the hologram in The Empire Strikes Back. So his involvement in this as being the big boss baddie, the Force lightning, his manipulative powers, his evil cackle, the way he moved slowly. There were so many different elements that Ian McDiarmid put into this character, making him so memorable and so iconic. I still think Emperor Palpatine is the best villain in pretty much anything. He's just so evil. He's just pure evil, and you feel that. He's creepy, he's scary, and so much of that doesn't only come from the writing, but from Ian McDiarmid's performance as well. Okay guys, this is it. My top 3 Star Wars films of all time. And this is probably the part of the list that shifts the most, because at certain times I feel like I put some over the other. This order has even, I think, shifted in the last hour trying to figure out what I want to say and which films are at the top. But coming in at number 3, oh boy, this is controversial, is Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. What? Number 3? At different times I've had this at number 1 and number 2. Right now I'm feeling it's my number 3 though, and I'll explain why.
Do it.
As groundbreaking as The Empire Strikes Back was, as possibly going down as the best sequel in history to anything, to any film anyway, I still don't think it was quite as groundbreaking as A New Hope, or as the original Star Wars as it was simply titled at the time. The Empire Strikes Back for me is the perfect sequel, and in some ways arguably could be called the perfect film. The cold opening, yes, that was definitely intentional because we're on the ice planet Hoth and it's cold there, but also just the way it kind of sets you up in a new location altogether. You kind of have no idea what's going on, and we're not really continuing on directly from the events of the first film, because there was no cliffhanger ending as there was with The Empire Strikes Back going into Return of the Jedi. It was kind of new location, new setting, reintroducing you these characters, and I love the way it just drops you straight in there. You see the world they're living in, you see what they're up to, you see that they're still fighting against the Empire and are hiding out in this secret base on Hoth. Luke getting lost in the snow is iconic. The taunt Lanthorns, the snow speeders, and then the whole Hoth battle that follows. It's so, once again, visually striking, and I can't imagine what this was like seeing in the cinemas all the way back in 1980, because up until that point, there was nothing that existed like this. And I'm going to say the same thing for A New Hope for so many reasons, but The Empire Strikes Back is probably the main reason Star Wars was solidified in popular culture. Because imagine The Empire Strikes Back was disappointing as a sequel. Imagine this one just didn't hit the same as A New Hope. Star Wars would have been kind of long forgotten. And yes, I guess the first film would have been appreciated, and perhaps all three films would have still been appreciated in some way, but this film hit with such a bang and did so many things that were striking. Even introducing Master Yoda on Dagobah, the swamp planet. Being introduced to more of the mystical side of the Force ghosts. Luke's decision to return to his friends to go and save them. Cloud City. Lando Calrissian being the most charismatic man in the galaxy. Let's be real, a lot of it's down to the cape and the mustache. And then the climax of the film with Luke facing Vader, and Vader revealing what was completely mind-blowing.
I am your father.
Once again, just so ridiculously iconic and something that almost can't even be explained. It's just Star Wars. It's just what we know as Star Wars, and that's what's so beautiful about it. This moment was a huge turning point in cinematic history, and possibly the biggest cinematic reveal or biggest cinematic plot twist in history. Imagine trying to keep this thing under wraps nowadays, trying to avoid spoilers with the internet that Vader was Luke's father. But even some of the subtleties, like the growing romance between Han Solo and Princess Leia, the time they spending on the ship, the fact the Millennium Falcon is broken for most of this film, seeing more of how the Empire operates and works, the asteroid field, Boba Fett, the introduction of Boba Fett as a bounty hunter. Boba Fett has so little screen time in the original trilogy and became such an iconic character and created, I guess, an army of Mandalorian fans and Mandalorian culture, Mandalorian lore, Mandalorian books and comics, and there was so much that spawned out of this. And he was just a background character that had like 3 lines, and then was reduced to falling in a Sarlacc pit in the next film. Okay, here we go, guys. Top 2. There's only 2 films left. If you know what they are, regardless of what I say here, I think it's going to be controversial, so let's do it. My second favorite Star Wars film of all time at this moment is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Yes, I'm a prequel boy. What can you say? I am jealous of everyone who was born at the right time in history to experience A New Hope in cinemas and see the original Star Wars on the big screen for the first time and have their minds completely blown. If you watch this film again today, you can still see the impact it had. You can still feel how different it was to anything right from the opening seconds. The Tantive 4 flying through space, being chased by the Star Destroyer, the Imperials breaking into the ship. Not only was it visually striking, it felt grand, but it felt somehow grounded in realism. It's so iconic, and part of that is the cinematography, part of that is the sound design, part of that is the characterization, the droids who, for some reason, are immediately so hilarious and likable. R2-D2 being so sassy, not listening to C-3PO. There's so much personality in all of this.
Well, I'm not going that way.
And this opening sequence and opening few scenes are what laid the foundations of what Star Wars has become today. Even getting lost on a planet like Tatooine, which was, of course, heavily inspired by Dune. And I think the call to adventure in A New Hope is what makes it so engaging as well. The fact you see Luke kind of disappointed that he has to stay home, and then bad things happen. His uncle and auntie are killed, he realizes he can't stay home anymore, and he has to venture out into the big wide world and continue to grow. Obi-Wan Kenobi is a character so mysterious. There was so much world building going on. There was so many feet. How do you even talk about these original films? Because they just laid so many foundations. It makes me excited to this day. I've seen A New Hope countless amount. It'd be 1,000 times, I reckon. And there's still something so iconic about it every single time you watch it. The Jawas and the grittiness of Tatooine and the Tusken Raiders, the cantina, the amount of creatures in the cantina, how real and weird it felt at the same time. The fact they don't let droids in here, it's like, why not? What weird class system is going on in this galaxy? Again, it's a random rule that you're like, well, that's interesting. Why is that here? Why does this thing exist? Why are they saying this? Why are they racist racist against droids. The introduction to the idea of the lightsaber, the introduction to the idea of the Force, space travel, jumping to light speed. Oh my goodness, for the first time, can you imagine witnessing this and just being like, what just happened? The Death Star, stunning. In fact, the Death Star destroys a planet, the whole thing just explodes. Also, mind-blowing. Princess Leia as a character, Luke Skywalker as a character, Han Solo as a character, Chewbacca as a character, C-3PO, R2-D2, Darth Vader. Everyone is so memorable, and so the banter is good, the character dynamics are good, it's fun. I'm getting emotional talking about it, because it's just like Star Wars, it's beautiful. The original Star Wars is just unreal, and there literally still is nothing like it today. I understand why people get upset when seeing modern Star Wars projects, and I guess they don't enjoy them because of how passionate they are about their favorite Star Wars and what Star Wars should be and the core identity of Star Wars. And when that's changed and shifted, I can understand why it leads to some fierce debate. I've talked in the past how that's part of what makes Star Wars so beautiful, though. Everyone kind of likes a different part of Star Wars and appreciates it for whatever part of the galaxy they enjoy. But just look at the foundation these original films have created. Literally nothing like it to this day. And the original magic, the editing of the space battle with the tension, you thinking that yes, the Death Star is potentially soon going to blow up this rebel base and blow up this planet, just as we witnessed it doing earlier in the film. The way this entire sequence is built, the tension, the trench run, the fact they missed the initial shot, Luke has to use the Force to make the shot, it's so brilliant. And I know a lot of people talk about how Star Wars and this film was saved in the edit, how it was only after multiple re-edits, and how Marsha Lucas, who was George Lucas's wife at the time, helped save this film in the edit with this final sequence, is what made Star Wars so iconic. It's definitely one of the things. It's so brilliant. I want to go back and watch this film right now.
Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million.
Which means, yes, of course, in number 1, my favorite all-time Star Wars film ever made is Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Like I said, these rankings shift every now and then. This is how I feel right now. Revenge of the Sith is, for me, the most nostalgic, the most powerful, and the Star Wars film that I guess moves me the most. And I think that's why I put it here. What's funny about this, though, is that the first third of the film, I think in a lot of ways, is a bit forgettable and a bit clunky at times. I don't know, something about, I guess, the way Anakin just kills Count Dooku, the way they're on General Grievous' ship, hunting General Grievous. But for me, Revenge of the Sith is all about, I guess, the action sequences and the tragedy of Star Wars, the tragedy of Anakin. And that is why I enjoy watching it the most every single time. Yes, nostalgia is definitely influencing my decision here. This was a big Star Wars film for me when I was a kid, probably the one I've seen more than any other. I mean, I just said I saw A New Hope 1,000 times. I've definitely seen Revenge of the Sith 1,000 times as well. Maybe not 1,000. That's a lot of watches. But not only was it iconic in its locations, it's something about the Jedi Council, Anakin's struggle, the lightsaber duels, unlike anything we've ever seen before, especially Anakin's duel with Obi-Wan. I just think it's the perfect climax to this trilogy. And let's be real, so much of it is just about the memes.
Hello there.
Server Anakin, I have the high ground.
Of course you do. Yeah, how does that end the duel? But it's hilarious and iconic every time, and I love it every time. What can I say? I told you, I'm a prequel fanboy. I feel like there's not even that much I have to say about The Revenge of the Sith. It's just the film for me, I guess. It's just the film from my childhood that I connect with the most, and sometimes that's all it needs to be. I don't really need to critically analyze it. It's just the one that strikes me the most, and I think that's the most beautiful thing about Star Wars. Like I was saying before, it's just, you can enjoy Star Wars in your own way, and that's why it's spawned so much community, because it's a source of such rich debate and contradictory arguments as to what your favorite Star Wars is, what you like about Star Wars, what you don't like about Star Wars. There's so much to it, and Revenge of the Sith is potentially the epitome of all of that. It's the film for me that I enjoyed the most and still enjoy the most, and I just want to talk about one specific moment in this film that I think is part of why it takes the top spot. For whatever reason, I think the mood in this film is just brilliant, and the sound design and music really hits me more than any other Star Wars film. In particular, the moment, which is about halfway through the film, where Anakin makes the decision to turn to the dark side. It's the scene where he's looking out the window and Padme is looking out from the other side of the city, and you can feel the two of them connected in some way, and like Anakin is about to make a life-altering decision. And just in creating this sequence and this scene, it hits me every time. I cry every time I see this scene. The mood and the atmosphere that's built with the low hum and the choir and it's so eerie and daunting, and the expression on Anakin's face as he looks out the window to Padme's face, it hits me every single time, and I think that's why this one takes the top spot for me. Visually as well, it's so striking as a film. Mustafar, Lava Planet, come on. The turn, the fall of the Jedi, Order 66, Kashyyyk, the Wookiees, every part of this film gets me in a way none of the others do, and I just love it.
I loved you.
Now, a little bonus for you guys. There is actually another Star Wars film. There's actually a few other Star Wars films. And one of those is the Clone Wars 2008 animated film. So if you'd like to see me rank the TV series and the animated series, let me know in the comments. Let me know your ranking of the Star Wars films as well. I'm looking forward to reading how you guys rank the Star Wars films. Everyone has a different ranking. I've never met someone who has the same ranking as me. If you do, please let me know. Watch this other video I made for more Star Wars, and thanks for watching this. My name's Andrew. I'll catch you soon.